Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar that Angular Zone is organizing today. I want to briefly introduce our co-host Vasim. He's an Angular contributor. He's leading the French translation of the docs, and he's also an Angular GDE. So, hello Vasim.
Hi guys.
How are you doing?
Great, thanks.
Okay, so today we have Kara talking about the latest version of the forms. So she has been working with Top Table and now is working with the Angular core team. He has touched on the Angular 2 material library and now is also working on the forms. So that's why we are inviting her. So Kara, what have you got for us?
Okay, so I prepared a really brief, I guess, slideshow and brief live demo to kind of talk about what's new with Angular 2 forms. So I guess I'll share my screen.
Awesome.
Okay.
Obviously, Vasim, feel free to jump at any time. So how is life in France? How is life in Paris?
It's raining actually.
Oh my God! Well, you can see here in London it's quite bright.
All right, sorry guys, I just have to set up my presentation view very quickly.
Okay, no worries.
Okay. For some reason, it doesn't seem to want. Okay, what do you see? Do you see my forms thing?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay, let's see. All right. So perfect. So we're going to be talking about the new Forms API in Angular 2. So let's start by talking about some things that forms do. So basic things that forms do. So one thing you might want is to serialize the value of your form. So you might want to post it to a server, you want to send it around, sync it with your application. You might want to init some data. So you might have default values, or maybe it's an edit form, and you might want to populate some initial information. You probably want to validate your data. So if you have a name field, you want to make sure that it's been filled in. And you also want to display helpful error messages if some of these validations fail. So that's basic forms. And in a real application, you'll probably have some slightly more advanced use cases, like you'll want to create your own custom form controls. You might want to create custom validators, like for instance, if you want to check if a username has already been taken, or you might want to dynamically create controls based on the state of your application.
Awesome.
So all of these things are things that can be handled by the Forms API. And as you may have heard, there are two approaches. So we have the Angular 1 style forms, which is also known as template-driven forms, and reactive forms, which are also known as model-driven forms. And each of these are both complete and separate solutions that can do all of these things. So if you decide to use one or the other, you should be able to get the full functionality.
And sorry to interrupt you. So, which of these two models can you mix them, or you should decide to use one or the other? How is that working?
So for the most part, I would suggest sticking with one, because if you mix them together, you're probably not getting the most out of either one.
Okay.
We can talk more about, and I guess I will cover more about what the intent is behind each module. So you can use them together, but since they're complete separately, that's how I would suggest using them.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so before we get into all of that, like how the approaches are different, let's talk a little bit about what these approaches have in common. So the main thing they have in common is their underlying structure. So if you consider the following, we have this form control on the page, and it's going to need a few things to work. So on the one hand, it's going to need a view. And the view is simply the element in the DOM, the HTML that you write, whatever the user can interact with and touch. And on the other hand, it also is going to need a form control model. So to be clear, this is not the domain model. So make sure that you don't confuse this with whatever you would pass into ng model in Angular 1, right? So this isn't just a value. the form control model is the value, but it's also a bunch of other things about the form control state, such as its validity, whether it's valid or invalid, its state in regards to user input, like has it been touched yet, is it dirty, and any errors that might have surfaced with its validation. So every form control that you create is going to need one view and one model, and in some way they're going to have to interact.
It seems like these states are the same that we used in Angular 1, isn't it?
They're very similar. Yeah. So Angular 1 had a very robust forms solution, and so a lot of the ideas have been taken from Angular 1 in terms of things that you'll need to know about.
Okay. Thank you.
So from what I just talked about, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because there's more than one type of form control. So we have text inputs, as we have here, but we also have number inputs, we have selects, radio buttons, checkboxes, and these disparate views all need to write to the DOM. So how you write to a radio button is different than how you might write to a text input. So each form control has a directive that knows how to access the value from their specific control and also to write to it. So all of these things here on the left, these are called value accessors, because they know how to access the value from the DOM element and how to write to it. I'm sorry, did you say something?
Oh, no, that was a video that just played.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to make sure that you didn't have a question. Okay, so these are all called value accessors. So you might have seen this term around control value accessor. That's the interface that all of these different value accessors will implement. So each form control has exactly one value accessor for its view, and it also is going to have one model object, which is known as the form control instance. So that's how individual form controls work. They have a value accessor and a form control instance. But in the real world, you won't always want form controls to be islands. Often you'll want to group them into logical groupings. For instance, this address. Groupings will allow you to validate form controls together or serialize their value together into one larger object. So if you look at this form group, or this address, it consists of 4 form controls, right? We have a street, a city, a state, and a zip code. And you could have 4 separate form controls that you validate separately, but it makes more sense to create a form group that has these form controls nested inside it. So these form groups get all of the same properties that individual form control instances have. Namely, it gets the value, the validity, the dirtiness, etc., but they need to be derived from their children. So, for example, the value of this form group is going to be reduced from the value of its children controls. So it's going to have a value that has a street key, and the street key is going to be the value of the street control. This is also the same for the validity. The validity state of the form group is going to reflect the validity of its children. So if one child is invalid, the whole group becomes invalid. And here on the bottom you can see that there are also some special methods that form groups get that form controls don't need to have. This is obviously not an exhaustive list, but 2 things you might be interested in are the get method, which allows you to get access to a child control by the name, or the has error method that allows you to check whether a specific child control has a specific error. We also have something called a form array, so you can choose to group form controls by index rather than by name. And the key difference here is in how you'd like to serialize the data. So if you want to send the data as a group, or then you probably want a form group, and if you want to send the data as a array, you probably want a form array. Another way to think about it is form arrays are really great if you have dynamic length. So if you're not really sure how many items your user might want to put into it, an array is a great choice. Okay, so far we have our different value accessors for the view, and then we have these 3 types of model. We have the form control, a form group which consists of form controls, and a form array which also consists of form controls. And then we also have these 2 strategies. So both strategies will need all of these things. They'll need value accessors, form controls, form groups, and form arrays. But the difference between the 2 strategies, template-driven and model-driven, is how the view and the model are tied together. So we've got these 2 sets of directives. You've probably seen them thrown around everywhere. So we have the ng prefix directives for template-driven, and we have the form prefix directives for reactive. So that's, by the way, a really good way to keep them straight is if you're trying to figure out which to use with which, just use the same prefix. So if you're using a form prefix directive like form control name, you'll probably need another form prefix directive like form group name, and so on and so forth. So each set of directives will tie together the view and the model in a different way. So this is a very kind of oversimplified summary of some of the differences. So the distinction between template-driven and model-driven has been confusing to people in the past because both approaches have a form control model for their value and the validity, etc. And they also both have some items in the template because otherwise you wouldn't be able to link your model to specific DOM elements. So both template-driven and model-driven forms have a template and a model, so that can be confusing to people. But what you really want to keep in mind is the difference is the source of truth and where and how the form control models are actually created. So in Angular 1 style, the source of truth is the template. So what this means is it's very what you see is what you get. If you have an active control in the DOM, it's part of your form. You can add and remove controls by adding and removing directives from the template. So the directives that you're using, ngModel, ngModelGroup, etc., are actually creating the form control models implicitly for you. You never have to explicitly instantiate a form control. So this is pretty convenient, but it's also somewhat indirect because we're inferring your form state based on what you write in your template. In reactive, you are creating the form control models yourself. You're explicitly instantiating themselves, so new form control, new form group, etc. And when you want to add or remove form controls, you're using the low-level APIs, like the add control method or the remove control method. And then you simply want to link the existing form controls that you created yourself to specific DOM elements. So it's pretty explicit. So to summarize,
I have a question. So which use cases you would mention for for each of them? Like for example, for what would be a good use case for the model-driven? So it's more like a dynamic form that you want to control, like fine-tune on the component. So it just depends on the team.
It depends on a lot of factors. So I guess maybe the best way to think about it is the template-driven approach is pretty convenient in that a lot is done for you under the hood. So if you have something, if you're a beginner and you want to do forms the first time, or maybe you have a very simple form, template-driven is great because it gets things done very quickly.
Okay.
But as soon as you start doing things that are a little bit more complicated, reactive forms actually becomes the better choice just because it's a little bit more predictable. So template-driven forms or template-driven directives are async. So there's a lot of things kind of going on behind the scenes to make them work. So if you're trying to do complicated things with template-driven directives and you don't understand exactly what's going on, that's going to be a little bit more challenging. Whereas with reactive directives, they're all synchronous and they're very predictable and easy to deal with because you're dealing with the controls directly. There's no template in the middle that's kind of blocking you.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so Chiara, I have a question.
Okay.
Let's say like you would generate a dynamic form out of like a JSON file. Would you go like template or reactive?
Out of a JSON file? I mean, that sounds like it would
let's
probably...
say like you have like a representation, a JSON representation of a form, and like you want to generate this form dynamically. Would you like use template or reactive?
That seems like a more natural case for reactive.
Okay.
Since you're doing more of the work in the component class, if you're working with something like JSON, if you're working with the objects directly, I think that would be easier than having to go through the template.
Yeah, and then like generate the HTML through your model, your components. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So let's see. So this was my last slide. I just wanted to do kind of a general overview of how everything kind of fits together. But if we have time, I have prepared a very quick demo, if you guys are okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so let's see. So basically, this is going to be a little ad hoc. So I created this really basic form here. I already put in the material design inputs and stuff like that, with the exception of the radio buttons and the select, because just want to keep it simple. So what we're going to do very quickly is this form isn't actually hooked up to anything. So it's not using template-driven, it's not using model-driven, it's just a form. So I'm going to do it once in template-driven, and then I'm going to refactor it to work with reactive.
Awesome.
So
yeah, great.
So if you look at what I have so far, I just want to call out really quickly. In my Bootstrap, I have these two methods, disable deprecated forms and provide forms, and I'm calling them here because I want to use the new forms API. So what disable deprecated forms does is it removes the old form directives, the deprecated form directives, from your platform directives. So if you remember, you can just kind of use ngModel and it's just kind of there. That's because it's in platform directives. So you have to remove those old directives, and then when we call provide forms, that will add the new form API directives. And you'll also notice that these are coming from the new Angular Forms package. You want to make sure that anything that you import always comes from Angular Forms if you're trying to use the new Forms API. So just wanted to call out that's what I'm doing. Also, probably good to mention that I'm working off of master right now, so there's a few things that I might be doing here that might be slightly different if you're still on RC4, so maybe you might want to think about installing from master to play with it, or when RC5 comes out. Okay, so I have this basic form. I'm using material design inputs, but you can just think of those as regular text inputs. It just kind of falls through. So I have a name here, a username. I have a street, a select dropdown for states. Obviously, I didn't try very hard. I only have 2 states. Zip code, and some basic radio buttons to ask if you need a newsletter.
Chiara.
Yeah.
We only see your web page, not the code.
Oh no, I forgot to switch. Okay, thank you for telling me. Oh my God. All right, let me switch my screen 1 second. Let's see. Entire screen. Let me know if you can see. Are we good?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've just been talking to myself. I'm sorry. Okay. All right, so this is the form that I was talking about. Hopefully you guys can all see it now. Yes?
So this is the HTML file.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so this is just a form. I've already put in a style sheet. I have the inputs here, but it's not really connected to anything yet. And so what I was talking about before that you couldn't see is this Bootstrap here where I have these 2 methods, disable deprecated forms and provide forms. And then if we go back to my HTML page, God, I'm so sorry. We can go through this again very quickly. We just have our inputs here for the name. We have one for the username. We have the street address here with the select for the states. As I mentioned before, I have only 2 states, but I guess suspend, disbelief, and pretend there are 50. And then I have these radio buttons. Okay, so let's start with the template-driven approach. So if we're using template-driven directives, one thing that's really nice about them is you can export them. So this form tag is actually so form tags are the selector for ngForm. So even without adding a directive, you have ngForm. So if you export ngForm into this form local template variable, you can immediately print its value. And we're going to use the JSON pipe here just so it's not object-object. So you can see we have this empty object here. And it's empty because we haven't actually registered anything yet. We have all these fields, but they're not registered with the form. So we can do that by going through all of these inputs. I can get all of them. And adding ngModel. If we refresh, you can see automatically now we have all of these form fields registered. If you type into them, you can see that it's filling in at the bottom, which is pretty cool. So as soon as you add the ngModel directive, you immediately get this registration. Another thing that you also get, if you were to, let's see, inspect one of these, or you get these classes here. So ngValid, ngDirty, ngTouched, etc. These are really great for if you're trying to style the inputs based on their state. You get these for free as soon as you add ngModel.
Awesome.
So That's pretty much all you need to do if you just want to get the value of a form. So you don't even need to bind to anything. You can just get the value with form.value. You can also export any level, so you don't have to do it at the top level. So if you wanted to go to this first name input, you could export it directly as ngModel. And so now it's in this first template variable. So if you were to just lazily print this value right here, I should remove it because it's going to look probably kind of weird. You can see that you can export it at any level. So obviously you don't want to put it there, but you can see that it's printing.
Yeah.
Okay. You can also, so what you're getting here is all the things that we talked about before. So you can also check its validity state. So it's true because we don't have any validators.
Yeah. So you could use it, to show or hide, some bits of this long form. You can, use that.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of properties. There's pristine, dirty, touched, untouched. There's a lot of things that you can kind of inspect to affect your application. One thing you might have noticed here is that we have the street, the city, the state, and the zip code all kind of separate, and that's kind of weird. We probably want to group them into an address, kind of how I mentioned in the slides. So we can easily do that by adding an ngModel group directive here, and just adding an address name. And what this does is it'll make sure that all of the ngModels below this div will be registered with this model group. So if we look back, you can see that address is now an object that has the individual controls registered on it.
Nice.
And it works just the same. The big win besides serialization is group validation. So you can also validate the address as a group. So if you wanted to export at this level, so address equals ngModel group. Okay, let's add a validator here so we can actually. Okay, so you're going to add an areas class here. You can say address is invalid, and we only want to show this if address.invalid. Right now the address is invalid, and as soon as you type something in, it's valid because it's not, because it's a required field. So, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's quite quick to implement.
Yeah, so I mean, there are other things that you probably want to do. If we go back to that list at the beginning of the slides, you might want to initialize some data. So let's say this is an edit form instead of a creation form, and you want to populate data from the server. This is probably what you've seen with ngModel before, right? You can bind to it, and let's just create this fake first name property. So let's say Nancy. What did I call that first name? Yeah. Okay. So now you can see we have Nancy here. It just pre-populates. And this is the same for sync and async. So if you're getting Nancy from a server, as soon as that value is available, it's just going to appear in the form, which is pretty cool. What else? So we have validation. We have error messages. Okay,
so
let's.
Now you've just shown an example of mixing these two approaches, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
So this last example was more like reactive driven, like coming from the component, or is it not yet?
Oh no, this is all template driven. Whenever you're using ngModel and ngModel group, you're always using a template driven approach. So until we change, okay, so think about it this way. ngModel and ngModel group create the form control model for you. So you'll notice that we never instantiated a form control, right? We never instantiated a form control group. And that's because those directives are handling that implicitly for us. If we're trying to use reactive forms, it's very different because, actually, let's do that right now. I'll show you how it's different. So, all right. Let's get rid of this first name Nancy thing. It's going to break this.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people is a little bit confused. There's no, at least for me and now, it's not clear. So yeah, it will be great to see that.
Sure. So, okay, so here's the difference. Before ngModel created the control, now we're going to do it ourselves. So we're explicitly instantiating a form group. Then if we wanted to add, I'm trying to remember what we actually had on here first, we're going to have a form control for that. Last, we should have a form control for that one too. Username, I'm trying to remember what we have here.
You can check back.
Well, let me just take a second. Okay, so you'll see here that for every control, we have to have, we're explicitly creating the model. And since address is a nested group, like it's a group within our parent form, we have to create a form group inside it. So let's say, that would be quicker if I did this. Zip, and then let's maybe do one for the newsletter. I think this is all of them. I don't really remember what I put in there. Okay, so this is incredibly wordy. So this is one way you could do it. I'll show you in a second how you can use form builder to make this a little less wordy. Okay, so instead of using ngForm, we're going to use the form group directive. And what the form group directive does is it takes an existing form group instance, like the one we just created in our class, and it binds it to this element. So we called it form, this.form, so you see that. And then for each of these individual controls, we need to tell the input which model it should link to. So for this first name form control, it needs to know which DOM element, which input element it needs to link to. And so that's what we do with form control name. So actually, I can very quickly, let's just delete all the ng models very quickly. Okay. And then all of these names are going to become form control names. Control name. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, I have a lot of extra.
Yeah.
Okay. And then all of our, so ng model group becomes form group name, since you're just linking this div with the form group of the name address. Okay, let's just.
First, last.
Okay, I'm trying to see if there's anything else I need to update here. My value, probably. Well, let's see what error we're getting. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I need to add reactive form directives. What a great reminder. Okay, so if you're using reactive style, you have to include reactive form directives. And this will be a lot easier once we move on to modules.
Yeah.
Because then all of this will be packaged together for you, but I don't want to get too into that now. All right, so let's see. No, oh, oops, I think I have a copy-paste error in here. Yeah, I do. Okay. All right, so now we have our form back.
Cool.
We have our value back. You can see we can already just type into it and it just works. So the difference is, as you can see, we created all of these form group and form control instances ourselves, and then we just said, hey, like this input should be linked to whatever, yeah, to that existing instance. So that's all you do. So it's kind of nice because you don't need to buy anything. It's already just kind of working. What else was I going to show you? Oh, form builder. So you can make this a lot nicer by injecting form builder here. So instead of doing all of this, what we can do, I'll move this down. We can replace all of these new form groups with form builder's group method, and that just returns a form group. It's a little syntactic sugar. And we can do the same with all of the form controls. My spacing is super messed up here. But.
Oh, I see.
So what did we have here? I think we had Nancy. I don't remember. Okay. So we go back here. Yeah, we have Nancy. So it's a little bit cleaner, and it's also nice because you can build things this way. So if you don't want to have to write new all the time, you can just use these kind of shortcuts.
Yeah, that looks much better.
Chiara, how would you handle the select box values?
How would I handle them? I'm not sure what you mean. Just, I mean, how would you like populate this?
Yeah, like populate or initialize or bind.
Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so if you look at this template here, each of these options has a value, and then whatever you're actually displaying. As long as you're inside here, you initialize it to that same value, it will populate. So it'll populate whatever value matches. So I can do the same thing with New York. Put New York in here. It refreshes, it becomes New York. So this is the same with radio buttons. They're all value-based. So all of the options within one select share the same control, and the same is true for radios.
Great.
So if we have time, I don't know, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, we have enough time. What are you thinking?
I was thinking maybe I could show you how to create addresses dynamically.
Yeah?
Yep.
Sure.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
So, all right. So let's say you have multiple addresses, or you want to be able to let somebody add in as many addresses as they want, an arbitrary amount. What you could do is you could add a form array. Let's see, we'll make this addresses, and then we'll move in here. Okay, so actually let me do this on the other side first. So, just for these here, I'm going to move this. Let's make this available everywhere. Okay. So, I want it to make it easy to build an address, so I'm just going to move this into a method. Okay.
Yeah.
This removes, this returns a form group. Okay. And then, let's see, let's do the same thing with an array, just to make it easy. So the form builder has a group method, it also has an array method. And as you might expect, you pass in an array instead of an object. And so here, we would want to build a group. Actually, let's save this as addresses. I'm missing stuff here. So this is going to return a form array. Let's add addresses as a property. This is going to be a form array. Okay, so this actually makes sense. Addresses. Okay, so in your parent form group, you have an addresses property, and this is a nested form array. Within this form array, you're going to have a bunch of form groups, each group being an address. So, in your actual view, you're going to want to have a form group for every address. So, address of addresses.controls. You'll also want to keep track of the index, and you'll see why in a second. So, I bind the form group name here. As it's an array, the form group isn't going to have a name. It's just going to have an index, right? So that's why you want to keep track of the index here. Okay, so let's see if we can get this to work. Okay, so if we refresh, you can see that we now have this addresses array at the bottom, of which the address that we have is an object. See how that works?
Awesome.
And if we wanted to really kind of show how cool this is, let's add a button that can add new addresses. So let's say add address. I guess I'll just make an empty button. It's not going to be styled very well, but add address. Okay, and now we can add an add method. The beauty of working with reactive forms is if you want to add a control, you can just work with it directly in the class here. So I have this addresses form array that I already created, and I can just push a new form group to it. So if I refresh, fingers crossed, you can add an arbitrary amount of addresses.
Awesome.
And each of these, is
nice.
down to the value. It's surprisingly easy to do if I had documented it. So yeah, I mean.
What if you look at the HTML? Can we look at the HTML just to see if there is any, on the actual nodes? So there will be some kind of ID there, isn't it?
I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for, but this is what we're creating here. So we have the form array, and then we have a div per address.
Yeah, I think this ng reflect name. That's the index that.
Right, and the reason so this is the compiler working, but yeah, that's the index.
So this is every of the groups, of the different groups. This is kind of the root for them. Yeah, cool.
I have a question from someone asking on YouTube.
Sure.
Could you show us an example with checkboxes, in reactive form?
Sure. Let's see. I don't have anything. What would checkboxes be good for? Let's see. Maybe just I am.
I am not a robot.
Not a robot. Okay. Okay. So let's add a form control name for this. This can be robot, and then in our, we have to add this here too. So this is I am not a robot. And this is true and false.
So I guess you can group them, yeah, right? If you have 3 checkboxes, you can group them in a single form group.
Yeah, you could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, that was awesome, Kara.
Oh, thank you.
That do you have anything else or?
Not at the moment. I mean, we could create a custom form control, but maybe that's best saved for another webinar.
Yeah, that's a good plan. So yeah, I'm really impressed. I think I like both styles. Maybe the last example with the addresses was really cool, really easy to get all these new dynamic addresses in there, and it just works. And then for the template, probably if you have been working with Angular, that will be really easy to to use straight away. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I have another question from YouTube, from Todd actually. Todd is asking how would you manage the state of the forms with the NGRX stores or NGRX effects for XHR requests? I don't know.
That's kind of a big question, but I mean, I guess the short answer is you definitely would want to use reactive forms for that.
Okay.
Yeah, we can keep the questions going, and we will be happy to try to answer them. But I would like to to thank Kara for his time and to being so kind to join us for this webinar. So thank you very much, Kara. And
thanks, Kara.
Yeah, really excited about these new forms. So let me hand it to Wasim. Wasim was wanting to say something.
Actually, I don't have anything to add.
It seemed like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, it was about the question, just reading people's question from YouTube, actually.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. We will try to answer them. That's okay. So well, that's all for today. Thank you again, Kara, and yeah, see you soon.
Thanks.
All right.
See you soon. Bye, Kara.